Hello friends, welcome to Edwiki Learning channel. Please do subscribe to get more updates on the DevOps concepts. This video is part of the full course AWS DevOps Practitioner training. Please do check the description below to get the link for the complete full course. Without further delay, let's get into the video. Thank you. Welcome back team, and we will continue our Terraform discussion, which is one of the popular infrastructure as a code method to deploy and manage infrastructure resources of different providers, and we are now focusing on AWS provider, right? So as we know that, right, when you are using a Terraform to manage the resources, right, from Terraform side, you need to understand the syntax and the Terraform workflow, but you need a good understanding about the platform as well, which platform that you are trying to manage, right? Because that's how we need to tell to Terraform what and how the resources has to be created in your target platform. Let's say AWS, right? So we are focusing on AWS, and if you are expertise on the AWS side, how the things work, then only you can manage it from the Terraform side. That's how it is linking with your target platform, right? Knowledge as well, guys. Just to recall our summary line, right? What it is and how it is. Good. So I think we already familiarized with how it is working. I'm just trying to give you some more tips, more scenarios, how to make the Terraform code even a little more matured, right? To use it in our real-time environments, right? So we'll talk about a few of the other code blocks, and we'll see how to uh, write it them. Okay. So as part of that, let me open the Visual Studio Code editor, guys. So here we have already spent some time in constructing the VPC block. I mean to say VPC project, right? As we already familiar that the each folder is acting as one project. It's now your requirement. You wanted to manage the resources as part of one project, as part of two projects, as part of three projects. It's based on the case-to-case basis, right? Each project will have its own state file. So we need to decide the the number of resources that you wanted to create should be part of a single state file in the single project, or you wanted to make them manageable in different project as a different state file. That's how we need to take a call, correct? So just to brainstorm the things here, how do we decide whether should we be managing the resources as part of one project or multiple projects? Just to brainstorm that, I would like to ask you a simple question, right? Let's say I wanted to have one web server up and running in my AWS. Okay, that's my goal, right? I wanted to create a web server and run the web server over there. That's my goal, right? If it is console, you as usual go to a console and you start all the resources, right? Now let me focus from the Terraform perspective, right? So the question for you now is, to have my web server easy to running, definitely I need a VPC, correct? So let's say to get start with, what I do is I'll create a VPC, all the VPC related components like internet gateway, right? NAT gateway, subnets, route table, whatever. I will create everything related to the networking. I'll make my VPC ready. Then I'll go and create a EC2 server. Then I'll start managing the required EBS volumes or Elastic IP, something like that. I'll deploy that into our VPC. Then finally, if I manage the user data, everything, my web server will be ready and I'll be accessing the website from my Route 53 record. Acknowledge me, guys. That is a simple process, right? To get started with a simple web server. I'm not too much complicating this with auto scaling groups and load balancing, all this. I'm just making it very simple for now, right? So in this, right, let's say tomorrow I wanted to deploy one more web server. Okay. So tomorrow, if I want to deploy another web server, do you think I need to create a VPC again? That's the question for you, right? So of course, if you want to create another VPC, you can create it, but just think logically, right? If you go in a logical manner, you don't need to create a VPC again, right? The customized VPC is already there. The customized subnetting stuff is already there. The VPC layout will be mostly same for all the projects almost, correct? So tomorrow when I'm trying to create another server for another purpose, you use the existing VPC. You will not be going to create a VPC for every EC2 server, right? That is where you need to understand, do we need to deploy them as part of one project or as part of multiple projects? Now let's say for this use case, right, what I plan is rather me putting the VPC creation plus EC2 creation, right? Rather me putting these two, combining it into a single project as a single state file, what I plan is creating a VPC is one project, done. Creating a web server is the second project. That means the VPC project state file will be separate. The EC2 server deployment is separate and it is maintained as a different state file. Are we good with this? I'm trying to brainstorm you guys to understand how to split your whole work it into a multiple projects, right? VPC deployment is a separate project. Let's say here I have written a VPC module. This VPC module is only taking care of deploying the VPC related stuff. Now, if I want to create a EC2 server, right? No, I will not go to the same folder and I'll not create one more file called ec2.tf. No. Why? If I create a EC2 related code in the same VPC block, then it is going to be a same project. My my EC2 related state file or the resources information will be get updated in the same state file. No, I don't want it to happen that. Got me? So let my VPC as a separate project. Then onwards, whatever I wanted to create a servers, I'll make them as a different project altogether. That's the good practice. This is just a simple brainstorming understanding, guys. So tomorrow, when you get into the real time, based on the requirement, based on the situation, we'll take a call whether all to be part of a single project, to be part of multiple projects. We'll split accordingly. We'll maintain a different state files as well. Okay. So for now, yes, I really get start with one simple VPC plus I wanted to deploy one simple EC2 server. Okay. So the VPC is already there. The VPC is already written as a module fashion. And we know that when I'm going to deploy the VPC, right, I can just go and start referencing to that particular module code like this and just pass the required values. Correct. That's how the Terraform module will help us to reuse the code, right? Rather duplicating it each and every time. Agree with me? Most of the stuff I'm doing some recap in a different way so that we can all be in a same page, guys, right? So in this case, if you see the VPC2 folder, right, I'm not rewriting the code of all the VPC related resources. There is no resource block at all in my VPC2 folder because I'm referencing to the existing and I'm just passing the values, right? So let me go ahead and deploy this particular, no, let me go ahead and deploy this particular project, guys. Okay. So let me do this. For example, I'll go to VPC2 folder, right? And let me run Terraform apply. So I'm just trying to deploy the VPC. Just to avoid the confusions, guys, the VPC3, I'm just deleting the folder. I created it in other lecture just to understand how to reuse the module, right? So let me delete it. Interesting. Look like the VPC is already created, so it says that nothing has to be changed. Okay. Let me do a simple cross verification because we are not sure whether we have deleted all the resources or still running whatever we have deployed last time. Okay. So let me go to VPC. I'm just confirming that my VPC is currently deployed. Okay, so yes, look like the VPCs are all there, guys. Okay, good. Let it be. Let me come back now. So really, I wanted the output block. Okay, so that uh, I can see at least what VPCs got created, what subnet got created here. Okay, so what I do is I'll just go and add one output block here, output.tf file. Okay, now let me print the VPC name. So this is the output block, and I wanted to print. I wanted to export the VPC ID. Now get the value. Tell me, guys, how to get the value now. This is the question, right? So this is where I need to tell that, hey, how do you get a value, right, for this VPC ID? So from where do you get a value? We already discussed about this concept, right? How to get a value of the resource that is deployed in a different block, correct? We need to reference this to your block type, block name, and the attribute that is being exported, correct? So initially, at least if you are having any confusions how to reference to that value, you can go to the Terraform dot state file and just look into the values here, how to get that value, in which format the value got stored. Maybe you can just look into that and get the things, right? But as I said, right, it's not recommended to go to the state file and read the state file, which is in the plain text format, which is leading it into, sometimes the the changes may happen to the state file. The state file may get corrupted, so it's not a good idea. Okay, so from your command line itself, you can run a command called Terraform show. Right, that's okay. I think let me remove this output.tf because currently this file is not completed, right? That's why it is showing some error. Let me run the command called Terraform show command. Let me hit enter. We'll see what will be the output of a Terraform show command. Okay, good. So this is the Terraform show command output, guys. If you closely look into this output, right, this is actually the the state file only, right? Rather reading the state file, going to the file and looking into the content, the same state file will now be showed to you in a user readable format. You see, if you look into the Terraform show output here, it is clearly telling that, right? So this is the resource block. You see, this is the resource block type, the resource name at a Terraform level, and these are the different resources that were deployed. Following me? So this is not actually a code, guys. This is actually filling up with all the values. You see these values, right? So this particular internet gateway is created with these values. If you do little scroll down, you see that the public routes are actually created with these values. If you do little scroll down, you see that this is actually a route table. It is showing the actual AWS specific ARN as well. That means whatever the info that you see from the state file, same information without me touching the state file, I can get it using the show command. Now, let's say I wanted to know the VPC ID, how to get the VPC ID, right? So just look into the Terraform show command output and you see here, right? So AWS underscore VPC is the block type, web underscore VPC is the block name, right? And somewhere you can see the ID. You see the ID here. So this is the VPC ID, and this entire stuff is actually coming from where? It is actually coming from this particular location. You see, module dot, right? This is your module name. In that module, right? This is your resource type. In that, this is the resource name. Are we on same page? Why like that? Because I think in our last lecture, I have shown you that to get the VPC ID, the code will be like this, right? The type dot name dot your attribute name. But do you think this syntax works? Let's say I'll go to VPC2 now. if I go to output.tf file, in the output.tf file, let's say I'll create a output block. I wanted to know the VPC ID, right? So here, if you do like this, right, it will not work. The reason is this AWS underscore VPC is not a resource block within this VPC2 folder, because in this VPC2 folder, I did not written a AWS VPC block, correct? Because the actual resources are actually coming from the module, not from your local resource, right? So you need to tell that, hey, you get it from so and so module, and this is the module name. Okay, so that's how we need to reference it. Let me try to add this here. So sorry, module name dot in that module, right? Get the VPC block and the VPC block name and then the attribute name. So to the better way to understand this whole complete path from where you need to get the value, it's better to see that in the Terraform show command and get the syntax from here, guys, and the attribute name that you are expecting to be, right? And this is the attribute name. Are we good on this? So now you just save this code, right? So let me run the Terraform apply one more time just to see what will be the effect of this particular change. So it did some mistakes there. Let me try, guys. Is it exporting without showing the module name there? Let me see. And one problem with this programming language is, guys, not only Terraform, any programming language, the syntax that you are using may get changed from version to version. That means today, whatever the syntax that is working, right, may or may not be working tomorrow when you are going for the different version. Okay. So let's say currently I'm using which version? When I run Terraform version, and I can see that the version is 151, right? So when you go to the different version of software, right, the syntax may get changed, it may not work, right? So that is the reason, right? It's very specific that like for which version that you written the code, and you need to stick to the same version at the time of you are using the code in wherever. Let's say today I have written the code and it is working in 1.5.1. When you give this code to your colleague, and if he is using the code in a different version, there is no guarantee that the code may work for him, and it may throw some errors, case that, right, that is always be there. So that's the reason it's advisable to tell that this code will be working on the a specific version, right? Be sure about the version which you are working on. So if you wanted to highlight that the code works for which version you have tested this, in the provider block itself, you can tell that, the code is working for which specific version. So let me add that syntax as well, because anyway I got into that situations now, right? So what I do is how to add required Terraform version, right? So I got some syntax here. Let me take this syntax and let me add it here. Okay, so this is how you can add a Terraform block, guys. In the Terraform block, we need to tell that this particular piece of code works only if the Terraform version is so and so on. You can tell the version should be greater than so and so on, or less than so and so on, equal to whatever you feel the code works. and we can just mention that information here, guys, right? That is how we can add the Terraform versions as well. Okay, now let me come back here. Now come back to our scenario. So let me get the syntax, guys. How to output variables rendered from module. Well, so this should be good. So I can see that the module name dot output dot where. This is good. So let me go and do the changes there. So what it is telling, right? Let me come back, guys. Okay, let me go back. Okay, so what it is telling, right? Whenever you are trying to export a variable, the one which is coming from the module, correct? This particular VPC ID is not a local resource. Hope you are following me, my statement, right? The VPC ID is not a local resource. Why? The VPC specific code is not within my project, right? That is actually coming from the module, and here is the module, right? It's telling that if this variable is not exported from the module itself, then you can't export it from your client side. Getting me? So can I use this statement, guys? The VPC folder is called as a module. The VPC2 folder is called as a client. Just to understand, client in the sense, the one who is actually using your module, that I'm calling it as a client side, right? Right? Or the 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 user, right? So if you wanted to get this value has to be exported, it has to be exported from the module side. That's what it is telling. So let me export that value from the module side. I'm just doing some changes to the module itself. I'm writing output.tf file in the Terraform module, and I'm saying that, hey, vpc underscore id is the variable that I wanted to export and get the value. Now here I can get the value from AWS underscore VPC type. Web underscore VPC is the ID, and ID is the attribute, right? Sorry, web underscore VPC is the name of the block. ID is the attribute that is exported. Are we good with this? So this is the statement that I am writing in the module itself. Okay. Now, when I'm using this module in my user side in the VPC2 folder, and here in the output.tf, what I'm doing is, hey, get it from module, the module name, and here you specify your output block, right? In the output block, there is a output variable called VPC underscore ID, and get it from there. So now let's see if that works, guys. Let me run Terraform apply one more time. This is how you need to do the development, guys, right? It's not like go to the documentation, read it, understand it, deploy it. You will get an error, understand the error, right? Then start doing the troubleshooting. I made one more change. Let's see this. I have few examples that are already composed for this and available in my Bitbucket, guys. I'm just not going with this hard-coded method, right? I just wanted to show you the way how we can do the development. Okay, you got me right. So like I don't want to uh, I don't want to directly copy and paste it and it is working, right? So I just wanted to show you this experience. So you see that now I'm getting this variable that is being printed here, which is now exported. If you look into the way now how I worked on, how I troubleshooted the issue, right? So if you closely look at the final output, the final code that is working, hey, get the value from module, okay? Specify the module name, and this is my module name, correct? Now I'm telling that get the value from this ID. This is the output variable ID. How it got this? This is the output variable that is actually exported in the module itself, guys. If you go to the module code within the module, if you go to output.tf, you see VPC underscore ID is the one which is I said to be exported, right? So you just need to reference this particular output variable in your user side and here. So the module name dot and the variable that is exported from the module itself, and that's it. Now you can see that it is actually printing that particular thing. Are we good with this now? Since it is currently in a working state, right? So now tell me, guys, just to brainstorm the things, right? Because we are already done with the Terraform, guys. We already completed the Terraform. We are trying to brainstorm the things, how we can make the things more better and better. When I have deployed a VPC, right? We have deployed the VPC ID, the subnets, Internet Gateway, route tables. We did deployed many things, right? As part of this VPC project. Now tell me, guys, what do you think? Which attribute that you may think has to be exported? Why do you export a variable? Why I need to print the variable value here? What's the purpose of this? Or why do I need to, ensure that this is what is being deployed? Why I'm exporting the VPC ID? Why not I export a internet gateway ID? You got me what I'm trying to? Let's say this is like whichever the variable or the whichever the resource that you may think that will be used in a different projects, whichever the resource that you are interested on out of this whole project, whichever the resource that you think that I need this information to know what is being deployed out of this entire project, those things we need to export it and make it available. Let's say internet gateway ID. Tell me, guys, do you think, are you really worry about what is the internet gateway ID that is being deployed? I don't care. Why? I will not use this internet gateway ID as a dependency in any of the other projects. I don't need to know what is the internet gateway ID that is being deployed. Agree with me? But I may need to know the VPC ID. Why? Tomorrow when I'm creating a security group, I must know what is the VPC ID. Tomorrow when I'm deploying the EC2 server, I must know I'm deploying the EC2 server in which VPC or which subnet. Getting me, guys? Right? So let's say tomorrow when I'm creating any other resource, do you think you will be telling it has to be created in which internet gateway? Will you use internet gateway as a dependency in any of the other projects? I'm sure no. Correct? The internet gateway is attached to the VPC, you are done. You will never use that as a dependency in any of other resources, right? So usually when you are planning your Terraform module, which resources that you may think that will be having a dependency feature in different projects, those things that we need to export it here and make use of these in different ways. Getting me? Obviously, in a simple statement, yes. Whichever the resources that you may think will be a inputting variables or will be a dependency in upcoming projects, all those things we need to make it as a exported variables, which you think will not be reusable values, will not be dependency for other projects. We don't need to export them. That's a common logic that we need to think of. So at least here, right, out of this all the resources, I would think that the VPC ID and the subnet ID, these are the two resources that you may be reusing again and again in a upcoming projects, correct? Will you be worried about the route table ID? I don't think so, right? Because the route tables are already associated with the subnet. So I will only care about the subnet now. which I need to specify at the time of deploying the EC2 server. I will not worry about the backend route tables, which are already there part of your subnet, right? So that's where you need to take a call, right? So here I have exported the VPC. Now let me export the subnet as well, because the subnet also needed when I'm trying to deploy the instances in upcoming projects, right? So let me export that as well. So in the module itself, first I need to export that. Let me go to output block. Let's say the private subnet, okay, and let's say private subnet which is in 1 edge zone, okay. Now let me specify the value. How to get the value, guys? Let me go to the private subnet here. Okay, I have only one subnet, that is fine. AWS underscore subnet. I'll say subnet 1, okay. AWS underscore subnet dot subnet 1 dot ID, right? So this is my subnet ID. I mean to say the output variable where I will be collecting the subnet ID. Now in my VPC2 folder in the output block, I will mention that, right? So this is my subnet ID value. Get the value from module and specify the module name dot specify your output variable name that was already exported as part of your module. So I did added this in the module. Now I started off using that in my target user side as well. Now let me run this command again. Just to call out, whichever the resources that you have been exported, only those resources you can reference in the upcoming other projects, okay. Within the project, if you want, you can reference it, but if you wanted to use that as a reference in the other projects, you must be exporting them. That's why I'm focusing on this piece. Now you see that I just have exported these two because I may be using these two in the upcoming projects as a dependency things. Good. I think with this I'm done with deploying the VPC. Now let me go ahead and start creating the let me do some more improvements. Give me a second, guys. Let me go to VPC2. I'm just looking into the chart window as well. Let me come here. So these names will not be the same. You can use any name that you like it here, and any name that you like it in your module side as well. I meant to say the names need not to be matching from your client side conventions and the project side. So this is the one which needs to be same. This is where we are referencing that which output variable that it has to refer. That's it. We don't need to worry about the other naming conventions, which is specific to local. That's a good thing. Now let me call out one specific scenario, guys. Okay, what we did it so far. So far I said that, hey, if you wanted to use the resources as a dependency in other projects, you must needs to be exported. The other advantage is, at least if you are not using them as well, when you do a Terraform apply command, the user will get to know what resources are being created as a console output. Good. Now let me call out one specific scenario. I have one Terraform developer here. This developer is actually started writing the Terraform code, and somehow the .tf files are created. When this user is deploying this project, right, the terraform.tf state file will be created. We already familiar by now, right? What is the importance of the state file? The state file is the one which is containing all the resources that were deployed. So that When you are running the apply again and again, it always compare with the statefile to know whether these resources were already there or not. Then it take a call whether to recreate it or not, whether to destroy, whether to maintain the same, whatever it is. Correct. Now the problem is, as of now, the Terraform code that you have written is available in your local machine. Correct. In my case, I wrote the code. I have my code in my laptop. Correct. So today you are doing the practicing, learning the things. This is fine. Assume like tomorrow you are working in a project with your colleagues. You have a team of 5 people, right? So today you wrote the code for VPC deployment. The code is already there in your laptop, okay? And tomorrow, right? So some changes would be needed to this VPC project, right? And let's say you are off, you are not there to do the change. Your colleague has to do the change, right? So how it's possible, guys? How would your colleague can do the change to that VPC? We should not do any changes from the AWS console, correct? Anything that you are trying to do the change in the Terraform code and run the Terraform plan and apply. That will take care of doing the necessary changes. I have shown you already if you do a change in the code and how it will take care of doing the changes, right? The inline or the recreate method, whatever it is. Let's say whatever the code that you have written, somehow you have shared the code with your colleague. Assume how to share the code, that's a different case. I don't want to mix up that concept now. Let's say you wrote the Terraform code for your VPC deployment. Now you given this code to your colleague as well. Hey, if you want to manage this project now onwards, you take this code, all right? And that's how it is. Okay, you given the code to your colleague, and your colleague also having the code in his local machine. Okay, now tell me, guys, if your colleague is running the Terraform apply on the same code that you have written, do you think he can manage the same project? No, right? Why? He has the .tf files, which is the code, but what about the state file? You got me what I'm trying to? When your colleague is running the Terraform apply command, though the Terraform code is same, still your Terraform thinks that, hey, I don't have any state file with me, right? Look like this is a new project. Let me go and create a new one. So the Terraform will try to create a new VPC network architecture in your AWS rather managing the existing one. Agree with me? So now in order to solve the problem, when you are sharing your code with your colleague, hey, you use this code to manage this VPC project, you should also share the state file. Agree with me? If you share the state file as well to them, then it should work. No matter whether you are running the apply command, whether your colleague is running the apply command, no matter, because your colleague also maintaining the code, it's the same code, plus he also has the same state file. And as we know that the Terraform, right, when you run the Terraform apply, it will look for the local state file. If the state file is there, it will compare. Okay, look like all the resources were there, only these are the changes as per the latest code, and it will try to manage the existing infrastructure. There will be no issues, correct? But the problem is sharing the code is okay. You write a code, you give it to your colleague. Hey, this is the VPC code. Now onwards, we need to use for managing this VPC. Good. But sharing the stateful is not a okay. Why? If you keep on sharing the state file there and there to multiple people, right? The problem one is this: it's possible that your state file may get corrupted, right? The second problem is, let's say your colleague has done some code changes, right? He has added one extra tag to the VPC, and he did the apply, and the state file is updated. Do you think the other day, right after that, can you manage the same infrastructure? No, right? Because the code that you have, the stateful that you have is legacy now. I mean to say those are not up to date, correct? Because the project stateful is already updated with the latest apply command that the other guy has executed. Following me, right? So after 2 days, let's say you came back to work and you try to run a Terraform apply command on the same VPC and you wanted to do something, you can't. Why? You don't have the latest state file with you. So the thing is, the conclusion is, right, I don't want to share a state file to the across the people just like that. It will causes or there's a possibility that the state file gets corrupted. There's a It's a very challenging to maintain the latest state file across all the board, all the people. So that's the reason the code is fine, right? I can share the code to all the folks. I don't care much, right? But the stateful is important, right? So that's the reason rather maintaining the stateful locally, the solution is you take a remote storage solutions, right? Like a S3 bucket. Now you keep the state file in the S3 bucket, not in the local. That is solving the problem. That means you tell to your Terraform that, hey Terraform, when you are trying to create a state file, don't create a state file in my local system itself. What you do? I am telling you that this is the S3 bucket where you wanted to keep the state file. So you generate a state file, keep the state file in the S3 bucket, not on the local. That is the change that I am doing, which is called as a Terraform S3 backend concept. When I say S3 backend, that means the Terraform is using the S3 bucket as the backend to store the state file. Okay. So the advantage is that the state file is not in your local machine, right? Each time when you are running the apply command, the Terraform will connect it to the S3, will get the state file, it will read the state file, it will do the comparison, and whatever the drift is there, it will try to deploy that. It will update the state file again, and it will upload the latest state file to the S3 bucket. You got me? So like whatever it was doing before in the local state file, the same thing will apply now also. There will be no change. The only difference is rather keeping the state file in the local system, it is keeping the state file in the remote S3 buckets. That way, you don't need to worry about opening the file, reading the file, right? And you literally don't manage anything related to the state file. Then tomorrow, let's say your colleague has to maintain the same project. Do you worry about the state file now? No. You only update in your TF files that, hey, the state file is available in the so on S3 bucket. That is the information that you need to maintain in your code. That's it. So tomorrow when you are giving the latest code to your colleague, when your colleague is running the same command, your Terraform knows, right, where the state file is there. The Terraform will actually look into the S3 bucket to the specific location to get a state file. It get that latest state file. It will make the comparison to the latest code, and whatever the drift is there, the drift will be get applied. It will update the state file. The state file will be putting back to the same S3 bucket again. That's how the Terraform will do it for us. Are we good with this, guys? This is the one simple change that we are doing it now. So simply put now, so don't keep the state file locally. Always better to keep the state file in the backend. And here I'm using S3 as the backend solution base. That way, if multiple a team of people wanted to manage the same projects, you don't need to worry about the stateful anymore, because your Terraform will be connecting to the remote S3 backend to get and update the state files for you internally. And that's the reason you don't touch your state file at all. You always work with your Terraform CLI itself. Right? So the same concept, like each project will have its own state file. I'm not worrying about the module here. I'm only worrying about the project. In the sense, if I come back here, do you think the stateful will be created for module or the stateful will be created for the user project? Getting me, guys? As per the question that I see there, right? The stateful will not be there for the module. Module is just a reusable structure of the code template, right? The stateful will be created for your project. Each project will have its own stateful. How many projects that you have that many number of state files. You store all of those state files in your S3 it into a different locations. You tell to Terraform where to store the state file. Are we good on this? right? So let me follow that simple change now. Okay, so the requirement here is I don't want to use the state file in my local system. That's the thing, right? So as part of that, right, first let me destroy this project. I'm trying to destroy all the resources first. Then I will show you how to do this simple change to use the S3 as a backend to store the state file. While this is happening, right, I'll just go to Terraform documentation. Let me search for a Terraform backend. This is still happening. I just wanted to say yes so that it will be in the process of destruction. Good. Now come back here. So if you look into the Terraform backend configuration concept, guys, in the left side, you see that available backends. You see here, the Terraform can store the state file in all these different storage locations, including local. You see the local here. The local is mean that the stateful will be get created in your own system, in your wherever you are running the apply command, in there itself the stateful will be created, and that is what we are using so far as a default method, correct? So if you look into the remote states here, the stateful can store in Azure, in Console, in Google Cloud Services, in Kubernetes, in some of the HTTP endpoints, and there are few more as well, guys. That means you can keep your stateful it into any of these different possible supported remote storage solutions. Out of all these different possible remote backends, whichever is convenient for your project, you need to choose the one. Let's say you are actually using the Terraform code to deploy the Azure cloud, then probably Azure RM is the best match to keep the stateful. Getting me? Let's say you are using the Terraform to deploy the Kubernetes, sorry, Google Cloud resources. Maybe GCS is the best possible match to keep the state file. Let's say you are actually using it to deploy the VMware, which is on-premises kind of the thing, because you know, right? There are almost hundreds of different providers that the Terraform is supporting. So based on which provider that you are actually managing, you can't choose the one which is relevant for you. In our case, since we are actually using the Terraform to deploy the AWS resources, and S3 is the best match for me. You see the S3 here. So S3 bucket is the best for me to use to store my state file, because I'm actually planning to deploy it into the AWS cloud. But you see the different other options as well based on the platform that you are managing. You take a call which one will be a more suitable, right? So now if you go to the S3, because we decided that S3 is the one which I wanted to use to store the state. Now look into the documentation here, how to use the state file and what will be the syntax to use the, or to tell to Terraform that the state has to be created in which bucket and which location, all this. You see, this is the simple syntax. You just copy the syntax, whatever it says, right? And of course it will give you more details here how to do the stuff. For now this is enough. Copy the syntax. I'll just come here. Let me do the simple cleanup, guys, to get start with the fresh. I'm removing all this existing stuff, including .terraform. Now you see this is my project, very clean project. Now I'll create a one more file here saying that backend.tf. Now here let me use this S3 backend syntax. Now you need to tell that in which bucket the state has to be created. Do you have the bucket already exist? Then you specify the bucket here. If you don't have the one, you create a bucket. You got me what I'm trying to? What do you prefer, guys? Can I go on use the existing bucket, or let me go ahead and create a new S3 bucket that which I wanted to use for my state purpose? Not VPC, I need to search for S3. I'm just checking, is there any buckets that I can use? Okay, yes. So there are many buckets available here, guys. I can use any bucket that I like it to keep my state file over there. Okay. So what do you prefer now? Can I go and create a new bucket or use the one which is exist already? So if you wanted to use any one existing already, just take the bucket name and specify that bucket name in your Terraform code, telling that, hey, Terraform, please store the state file in this bucket and specify the location as well, right? So in this bucket, right, it can maintain the folder path, right? So you can specify that folder path, right? So let's say here I'm trying to deploy the VPC, right? And this VPC I'm planning to deploy where I wanted to planning to US East 1 region, let's say. Then you follow the best practice here to mention the path. This is your folder structure. Let's say in US East 1, sorry, right? In US East 1, right? I wanted to deploy the VPC, right? And yeah, I think this is yeah, VPC, and let's say this is the dpt 11 dot state file. Sorry. Let's say terraform dot tf state. So this is how I'm maintaining the path, guys. It's up to you how you want it to, but it makes easy for me to understand that this particular state file is actually to deploy the VPC, and this VPC is on the US East 1 region. So it's very easy to understand the purpose of this state file by looking into this path case, or else it's up to you. There is no rule that you need to follow this folder structure. You can use any ABC, not a problem. Getting me? But now I really don't want to use this existing bucket. I'll show you how to create a new bucket which I wanted to use to store the state file. Okay, this will definitely work, but I wanted to show you how to create a bucket as well. Okay, now tell me, guys, I want to create a new S3 bucket which I wanted to use to store my state file. You want me to create a S3 bucket by going to console and click on create bucket, or you want me to use the Terraform code itself to create a bucket? Getting me, right? Since now you know the Terraform concept, I don't want to create it from UI. So let me go and create a S3 bucket from the Terraform code only. This is where you need to do a brainstorming. Now tell me, I want to create a S3 bucket. You want me to use the same VPC project to create a S3 bucket, or it will be a different project, right? When it is a new project, right, then it will be a new folder. Obviously it will be a new project case, right? I don't want to, because creating a S3 bucket is one time activity which I wanted to use in all my upcoming projects, right? Wherever I'm using the Terraform project feature, I will be using the same bucket to store my state file. So I can't mix it with the VPC project, right? So let me go with the new folder because this is a new project, and as usual, right? So this project will have a Terraform, sorry, provider block, right? It will be having a, for example, S3 block. It will be having a variables.tf file, right? It will be having a terraform.tf vars. So you can just build the structure, right? So let's say a provider block for AWS region. This is a new project, right? And every project will have a provider block and the variable declaration values. That's the same concept. Let's say var dot region, right? And this is the variable. Specify the variable over there, and let me maintain the value here. Variable equal to US East 1. Right now, let me go to s3.tf. Let's start putting the code over there. Now, This is the resource block, right? Now we need to understand what is the resource type and the structure to create a S3 bucket. Same process. So if you wanted to know all of them, right, we need to get into the documentation, right? Hey, I wanted to know what is the documentation for creating a S3 bucket. I'm more focusing on the approach here, guys. That way you will definitely know how to create any resource that you like it. Right? Get into the documentation, understand the resource type, copy that. Sorry. Resource block, resource type, the resource name. Let's say this is a state bucket. Any name would be fine, whichever you think more meaningful. Right? And then we need to specify the values here. Okay. So in the provider.tf, guys, whatever the region that I'm specifying here, right, this is not about my S3 bucket. Okay, this is just to tell to my Terraform that hey, you initialize the AWS provider with this default region, which is not going to be used for your S3 purpose. Anything that you wanted to look at for S3, look at the S3 block only, right? In this block, whatever you define, that is specific to the S3, right? This is to initialize my project, right? This is to initialize the project. Right. So the moment when you log into the AWS console here, definitely there will be one region will be selected, right? So something like this. So just initialize the project with this region, right? So let me come back. Now let me tell to Terraform that how to create a S3 bucket. As usual, spend some time in the documentation, guys. Go through here, right? Follow this information and just put the things here. Okay. So you can always take the help of ChatGPT. Hey, can you give me Terraform code for creating S3 bucket? Sometimes you can give the context as well. Let's say I wanted to create this bucket for keeping the state file, right? You can tell that as well. For creating S3 bucket to use to store state file so that it will give you the accurate code, right? You see the yes. So the provider block we already took care of, and this is the AWS bucket creation process. So let me take this syntax, guys. Copy the syntax, come here, let me put it here. This is the way how we need to do the development. Now you take care of some of the changes that you wanted to do. Maybe this is your bucket name. Let's say dpt11 web server. Sorry, I will say Terraform state store. Any name that you like it, not a worry. And that's it. You are done. This is some tags that it has given by default. You can change if you wanted to, or else let it be keep it as usual. Let me try to execute this code. So I'll just go to backend folder. Now let me run Terraform init command. Don't worry about all this. I think you already familiar all this, right? ACLs should be private or should be enabled. All these options will come usually in the UI as well when we are creating a bucket. Remember, we managed the bucket permissions as well, right? The bucket should be public or private. All these things are now, right, putting it into this. That's why the platform knowledge is more important when we are using this type of infrastructure as a code to see how we are creating. I have the code already readily available in my Bitbucket, guys. I think if I go here, but I just wanted to show you the approach just to tell you the things. So if I go to Terraform, right? So in the backend.tf, here you can see that the code is already there to create a S3 bucket, all this. I think this is the one. Okay, so rather copy pasted, I wanted to show you the approach. Anyway, the initialization is completed. Now let me do the apply command. Terraform apply. Now tell me guys, when I'm running the Terraform apply command now, where do you think the stateful will be created? This is a project, right? Whatever the backend folder itself is one Terraform project. Each project will have its own state file. Now I'm running the apply command now. Where do you think the stateful will be created? Yeah, it will be definitely local only because I'm creating a bucket for now. Okay. In upcoming future projects, I will use this bucket as a remote state, but for now, it will be a local only. Okay. So EAST is the region. Let me do that correction. Right. So let me try to accept this plan, whatever the plan that it has made. Yeah, apply completed. One resource is added. The bucket is created. So let me see what is my bucket name here. So this is the bucket name that is got created. Copy that. In this S3 project, the stateful is created locally only, and that is expected because first time when you are creating a bucket, it will be local only. Now you verify that bucket name here. Let me refresh here. Let me see that dpt11 Terraform state store bucket is created and the bucket is empty for now. Good. Now I'll come to the VPC project. In the VPC project, in the backend.tf file, and this is where I will tell that, hey, use this bucket to store the state file. And this is the location where it has to store the state file and the region, all these things. So just come down. Let me go to VPC2 project. Now I'm planning to deploy my VPC and let me run the command called Terraform init. I'm initializing my project. Now you can see this difference as well, guys. In the initialization, it is telling that successfully configured the backend S3. This is the change. Good. The initialization is completed for my VPC project. Now let me do Terraform apply. I really wanted to deploy my VPC. Yeah, now it is trying to create 8 resources. Okay, let me say yes, I wanted to. Now you see guys, it is actually creating the VPC and all the resources. Good. And it is telling that which resources are created, the ones which you have kept in the output block. The difference here is in the left side panel, you don't see the state file. Are we good with this? You see, under the VPC2 folder, the Terraform stateful is not created. So the stateful is not local now, rather the stateful is created, updated in the S3 bucket. If you go to the S3 bucket and refresh this bucket, which is currently empty, right? Now you see that the folder is created. Why the folder name is useist1? Because that is the folder name that I have asked it to create. This is the key, right? This key is the naming, like the folder path. Okay, I said that create a folder like this, useist1. That way we will easily understand that, okay, all the projects related to the useist1 region will be here. Then, okay, all the VPC related state files will be in the VPC folder. Now you see this is actually the state file. So the Terraform can, you know, read and update this state file when you are using this VPC project, because you already referenced that in your backend.tf file. Are we good with this? That way your Terraform file will be secured now, because you are not touching that state file anymore. Now, if you give this code block to your colleague, let's say, hey, use this code to manage the VPC project, right? You don't need to worry about the state file now, because the backend.tf is already referencing to the specific location where the state file is there. Whenever you do any changes to the code, it automatically sync up that with your existing state file in the S3 bucket. Are we good with this? So let's say whenever more than one guy is actually actively working on your projects, like a team of people are actually working on the same Terraform project, obviously, right? Today you made some changes and tomorrow your teammate has to do some changes, right? It happens. So the improvements that I have done is rather keeping the state file in the local, I said that, sorry, I need to use this slide. Okay, rather keeping the state file in the local, so it's better to keep the state file in the remote S3 bucket. So far so good, right? But one problem with this is, let's say, right, both users, both of you guys are actually trying to run the apply command at the same time. Got me what I'm trying to? Let's say the first user is running the apply command, he is actually trying to add a tag for a VPC. Let's say the second user is also running the apply command, he is trying to do some other changes to the same VPC project. Both users backend.tf is actually referencing to the same state file in your S3 bucket. That makes difficult Terraform to update the state file, right, at the same time. Getting me what I'm trying to, right? The both users cannot manage the same state file at the same time. Your state file will get corrupted, right? So how to avoid that, right? Whenever the Terraform project is being manageable by multiple people, then when one user is trying to update the state file, the other users should not be allowed to update the same state file. Are we good with this? To restrict that, we need to take the help of a database. Here I'm using the database called DynamoDB. DynamoDB is the database, right, which is used to store the data in the key value pair kind of. This is how the data will be stored. Let's say lock is the key, the value will be true or false. This is a simple example. What will happen, right? You tell to Terraform that, hey Terraform, you now start using the DynamoDB table as well to keep the status of the state file, whether it is locked or unlocked. That way, whenever the first user is running the apply command, the moment when the apply command is started, the Terraform first will go and update the DynamoDB table lock as true. Then it will start taking the state file, compare the state file, understand the differences, deploy the resources, then update the state file again. It will do all of this. While the apply command is in the process, if the second user is trying to run the apply command at the same time and referencing it to the same S3 bucket, then the Terraform will fail to do that. What Terraform says, hey, I just looked into the I just looked into the lock status in the DynamoDB table. it says the true. Look like someone else is already using the statefile. You can't use the statefile now. So the Terraform apply will be failing for the second user at the time when the first user is already in the process of doing the apply. That way we can avoid this type of conflicts, like multiple users are trying to update the same statefile at the same time. That will be avoided. So when the first user apply is completed, then the Terraform will go and make the lock status to false, saying that apply is completed, the lock is released. Then only the second user can run apply command and can manage the infrastructure changes if he wanted to, right? So in general, so this is all a backend Terraform will take care of. We'll never ever know, right, who is running the apply command, right? And who, whether currently the lock is true, false. You can't see all of these just by default, right? But there's a better way to handle with the help of a TerraGrunt concept, which is not Terraform, guys. TerraGrunt is the another wrapper that will give you more advanced stuff to manage the things. But at Terraform level, no, you will not get all of these from Terraform side of world, right? But this is the another feature that is currently supported just to avoid this multiple users are trying to update the same statefile at the same time. Okay, so it will not happen in real time mostly, but yeah. So if you get into that situation, the second user Terraform command will get failed because that is already in the process of update. Okay, so I'm not talking about the TerraGrunt at this time, guys. Don't worry, but I just given that answer as part of the question that I see over there, right? But yeah, the TerraGrunt will give some more add-on benefits on top of this Terraform. So we are not looking into the TerraGrunt at this time. I don't want to make this more confused. Okay, so that is what is the DynamoDB, right? So DynamoDB is kind of a storage again where the data will be in a different key value format, right? So in AWS, if you search for DynamoDB, you can see here managed NoSQL database kind of. So this is the DynamoDB which I need to use now to store the lock status. Why DynamoDB? Because the Terraform is currently supported DynamoDB only to keep the lock. So if you get into the documentation here, you can see that the Terraform can store the state file in the S3 bucket, and the Terraform can store the lock, right, in the DynamoDB, right, in order to ensure that the lock is being set or false to true. Accordingly, it will manage the consistency of your state file so that the state file will not be get corrupted just that the multiple people are trying to attempt it. Are we good with this? So if you wanted to use the DynamoDB, yes, again, you need to create a DynamoDB table and start using that, right, in your Terraform project. I think for now, if I go to the AWS and look for the tables here, I don't have any DynamoDB tables. So I need to create one DynamoDB table now to start using this. Your documentation tell you how to use the Terraform code to create a DynamoDB table, all these things. If you go little below, you see here DynamoDB, all these things. I think there will be a section to know the syntax to create a DynamoDB table as well somewhere. It's lengthy. Why the documentation is lengthy? Because they will be talking about a different alternative multiple possibilities case. That's why it is all lengthy concept. But for now, let me get it from here. You see, so I have the AWS underscore DynamoDB underscore table, that is the resource kind and the name, and you maintain the corresponding values for that. So once we know this whole concept, right, we don't need to too much worry about line by line again. Just take the example, just modify the values, go and start deploying that. That should work for you, right? So let me take this example now. Copy this DynamoDB code Let me use it here. You see guys, I'm going back to the backend folder again, and I'm trying to put one more here. This is s3.tf to create a s3 bucket. Now this is a DynamoDB file to create a DynamoDB table. Why I'm adding this DynamoDB table code in the backend folder? Because S3 bucket, DynamoDB table together can go into a single project, right? Because the purpose of these two resources were the same, correct? Getting me? Some time back I created a bucket. Now I'm creating a DynamoDB table as well because I wanted to use the locking concept as well. So these two together go into a single project, right? That's how we need to see. So now let me see the changes. Maybe I'll say this is a Terraform state table. State table. Any name is fine, which you like it. I'm just giving some name there. And let it be whatever the values that it has, because we don't know how to create a DynamoDB table from the UI side. So we can't understand these parameters, how exactly, but we don't need to at this time, guys. Okay. So just take that and just go ahead and upgrade the project. So I'll just go back to the backend folder one more time. Now let me run Terraform apply so that it will start deploying the DynamoDB table as well. You can get the same code from ChatGPT as well. Hey, can you include DynamoDB table as well to keep the state lock? You see, you'll get some syntax. This is your DynamoDB table syntax, exactly the same. Okay, let me apply that. Right, so the table is created. If I come back and look at my DynamoDB table list here, we can see that the table is created. So it will use this to store the lock status. We don't need to worry about how it is storing behind the screen. Let the Terraform handles. For now, all what I need to do is in your projects, you see in the VPC project, right? In the VPC project, in the backend.tf, this is where I told in which bucket it has to use the state file. Now we need to tell one more statement saying that which DynamoDB that it has to use to store the state file lock. How to get the syntax? So get the syntax from here. You see, it has given the syntax as well. DynamoDB underscore table equal to, and specify the DynamoDB table name. So this is the parameter. Now my table name is, what is the name, guys? State underscore table is my name, right? So state underscore table is my name. Just specify that. Now let me go to VPC2 project. Now let me remove the .terraform folder. Can you tell me, guys, why I'm deleting the .terraform folder now? Since you know that this is just a plugin documentation, right? This is just storing the plugins. So why I'm deleting the .terraform now? Because you made a significant changes to the backend state, correct? Not for the resources. If you're doing any changes to the resource block, you don't need to run the init again and again. But now I'm making the significant changes to the backend.tf. So as part of the init command only, your project will be initialized, right? And this is a big change that I have made. So you need to reinitialize the project to get the latest DynamoDB changes that you have been asked for. Getting me? So now if you do a Terraform init, it is actually trying to initialize the backend, and it is initializing the S3 backend. You see, that's the reason I have removed the state file and I'm running the init again, because it should know that it is using the DynamoDB table for storing the lock status. If you are doing any changes to the resources level, you don't need to run init again and again. Well, it's done. Now let me run apply command, guys. Okay, so let me do this. Well, it's done. So this is how it will be. Okay, so it takes care of locking and all in the backend for you automatically. You don't need to worry about that. So when multiple users are trying to do at the same time, then you will definitely get this error. Okay, good. Now let me move on and create a EC2 server, guys. Okay, so currently I deployed the VPC as part of this VPC project. The state file is already there in my S3 bucket. So far, so good. Now tell me, guys, I want to deploy a EC2 server. You want me to deploy the EC2 server as part of the same VPC project, or I wanted to go to a different project? Usually, what will be the best case, right? It should be part of a different project. Again, why it should be a same project? Do you think VPC and the EC2 servers both will be a same project? I don't want to. If you want, yes, no one is stopping. I'm just trying to see the best practices. Getting me? So VPC is the generic one, which you created one time. Then you keep on creating EC2 servers whenever you need a requirement, right? I don't want to keep VPC project aligning with your EC2 as well. Why should I be touching my VPC again and again? So now onwards, I will not touch anything to my VPC. So let me go and create a new project. EC2 is the folder that I have created for my EC2 project. I wanted to deploy my EC2 server as part of the new project. Now, as usual, if this is a new project, you create a provider.tf file. You create a, I would say backend.tf file. You create a, you know, variables.tf file. You create a terraform.tf vars. And again, if you think that you are keep on creating the EC2 servers every day for different reasons, again, like VPC, you create a EC2 server code as well as a module. Then you call the module and you start deploying the EC2 servers. You get me, guys? The way how I have written the VPC module, then use the VPC module to create my VPCs whenever I wanted to. Now also I can create a EC2 module, then call the VPC module to create a EC2 servers possible. But I don't want to follow this entire process every time, right? That's the reason I'm directly going and creating EC2 as a standalone code rather making it as a module code. Are we good? Right? So let me start doing a small stuff here. I wanted to deploy the EC2 server and this is my provider block, AWS provider, right? Region, let's say this is var.region, right? This is variable block. Region is my variable and region, let's say this is US hyphen east hyphen 1. Now let me go to the backend.tf. This is where I need to tell that this EC2 related state file has to be stored in which location in my S3, correct? So I'll just get the syntax from here, guys, because the syntax is already there. Let me copy this syntax. Now here, let me use it here. What are the changes that I need to do here? You can use the same DynamoDB table for multiple projects. You can use the same bucket name for multiple projects, but ensure that you are changing the key location, correct? This is a new project, right? The new project state file will have a new location, correct? So here I'll say that this is the web server, let's say. That means for this EC2 related state file I wanted to store in the web server folder in the USCS1 folder. Getting me? So this is the important piece. Each time when you are going for a different project, you ensure that you are referencing that to a different location here. I don't want to use the same VPC state file in my EC2 project, right? So we need to make that differentiation here. Now it will create a state file in this location in your S3 bucket. I'm done. Now write a code for your VPC, sorry, for EC2. EC2.tf. Now this is where you need to go for resource block and AWS underscore, right? AWS underscore instance is the resource type. Specify the resource name. I wanted to deploy the web server. Now let me specify the AMI, and this is where I need to tell the AMI ID. What else, guys? If I want to deploy the EC2 instance, what else that I need to look for? Maybe instance type. Instance type, let's say a t2.micro. I can make this as a variable, but since we already familiar how to make the variabilization, right? So I'm not proceeding for making them into variabilization every time. Getting me? I just go with the hard-coded value for now because our topic discussion is something else, right? Now the key one, right? So the key name. So let's say dpt11 is my key. What else, guys? Let's say I wanted to deploy this EC2 instance in my custom VPC that I created some time back. You see, some time back in this VPC project, I deployed the VPC, right? In that VPC, now I wanted to deploy this EC2 server. That is my goal, right? So how do you tell that your instance has to be deployed it into which VPC and which subnet? That's the question. If you don't know, just look into the console. Just go to the EC2 launch process just to see what are all options that it will expect to deploy the EC2 server. Then look at your Terraform code to see how to give the values. Correct? So when you are deploying the EC2 server, right, you just give some tags. You give the AMI ID, then the instance type, keep your name. You come to this networking settings. You do edit. You see, this is where you need to tell the instance has to be deployed it into which VPC and in which subnet. The same information now I need to provide in my Terraform code as well here. Getting me? But the question is, how do I know what is the argument name that I need to use here to specify my VPC ID and the subnet ID? Correct? That is the question. How do you get that? You get that from the documentation. So go to the documentation and look for Terraform AWS EC2 instance that I wanted to create. Look at here and just look into the documentation here. Go to the argument reference and start looking one by one. Which is the argument name that I need to use to specify VPC and the subnets where my server has to be created, correct? That's the only way. Of course, once you get a familiarity, you can use ChatGPT, you can take some examples as well. But I'm trying to see the process. You see somewhere, guys, subnet ID, okay, this is where you need to tell that the instance has to be deployed it into which subnet. Are we good with this? This is what I need, right? Take this argument name, come here and specify the subnet ID. But if you look into this one, right, there is no VPC section, right? You see, nowhere it is telling that how to specify the VPC ID. You see, there is no VPC ID to specify. Of course, in the console, it is asking you, hey, tell the VPC where you want it to. But in a Terraform documentation, it's not showing how to specify the VPC ID. The thing is, If you specify the subnet ID, that is good enough, guys. It will automatically understands that this subnet ID is actually come from which VPC, and it will go and choose the same VPC for you. Are we good with this? Correct. So that's the reason telling the subnet ID is enough in the Terraform side. You don't need to tell the VPC ID also. Now the question for you, how do you get the subnet ID? This is where I need to give the subnet ID value, right? Maybe the private subnet ID. How do you get this subnet ID? From where do you get this subnet ID? Right? From where do you get this subnet ID? If the subnet is created as part of the same project, you know already, right? How to reference that to the existing by mentioning that AWS underscore maybe a subnet dot type name dot whatever it is. But now the subnet is not created as part of the same project. It is created as part of a different project. You see, VPC2 folder, right? This is the project which was actually deployed the subnet, which I wanted to use in my project now. Remember sometime back I used the output statement. I exported the subnet IDs telling that it will be useful in upcoming projects to link them, all these things, right? This is the time to see how to use those existing resources deployed by a different Terraform code or a different Terraform project. In a way, can I use this statement, guys? Here I wanted to use the value which was already deployed. Are we good with this? This subnet ID is already there in my AWS, correct? If I go to the AWS, if I look into the VPC, the subnet is already there. Now I wanted to use this subnet which was already running in the AWS. If you go to the subnet block here, right, the subnet is already there. Maybe private subnet, you see. Let's say this one, let's say. So this is the subnet ID that I want to. But I don't want to copy the subnet ID and use this subnet ID here like this. No, I don't want to go with this approach. If you go with this approach, yes, definitely it will work because whatever the subnet ID that you are expecting, you mentioned that and it will definitely work. But the thing is, this is not a recommended way, right? Why this is not recommended way? Today you copied this value manually from your console and you mentioned here, no problem. This subnet is actually managed by whom? This subnet is managed by another Terraform project, right? In this case, the VPC2 project. Let's say after some days, someone went to the VPC project. They made some changes to the subnet sections, and they have ran a apply command. As part of that, let's say the subnet is recreated. Subnet ID has got changed, whatever it is, right? Then your dependencies project will be get affected. Agree with me? Right? I mean to say, if you're using the value as hard coded like this, copy pasted from your AWS, tomorrow for any reason, let's say this subnet is deleted, someone recreated a subnet, new subnet, and if you use this ID, and your dependence project will get fail in the down the line because that is not exist anymore. Someone made some changes, so this is not recommended. So, if at all you are referencing the values that are already there in AWS, better you go with the dynamic approach. What is the best way to use this value as a dynamic way? So where exactly this value is being stored, guys? What is the source of truth for now? The source of truth is this subnet is being managed by the VPC2 project. The VPC2 project is storing this information in the VPC2 state file, correct? That is true. The VPC2, if you go to a backend.tf here, right? So definitely in the terraform.tf state file, right? The subnet related information is there. So tomorrow someone else is doing the changes to the VPC code somewhere. If that is changing the ID for any reason, that ID will definitely be changing in the state file as well, correct? Because it has to ensure that the latest is already updated in the state file. So what I'm trying to tell, any changes that go to this VPC project definitely gets updated in the state file. So I'm planning to get the subnet ID from this state file, then that is a dynamic, guys. Agree? So tomorrow, if any changes to the VPC project, no worry, because I'm getting that value from the state file directly. If someone is updated, state file is updated, I'll get the latest value. So that's where I'm not doing any hot coded from the console directly. Are we good with this? If then, how to tell that get the value from this state file, correct? So in my EC2 project, right? In my EC2 project, here I need to tell that get the value from a different project's state file. Anything that you wanted to get from existing resources, then you need to use the data block. Data is the Terraform block which will use to get the values of the existing resources. And here I wanted to get the value from the existing remote state. So your syntax will be like this. I wanted to use the Terraform underscore remote underscore state data block, which will be used to get the value of the existing projects. And you get into the documentation, read the examples here, and just fill up the things. Maybe here, take this example. I'll just come here, right? Maybe I'll just create a one more file as data block. This is where I'm trying to get the existing resources. If you closely look at here, right, the data block, this is Terraform remote state. That means get the value from the remote S3 Terraform state file, right? And this is just a name, and you tell from which bucket you are expecting the value to come from. So get into the documentation to get exact syntaxes, guys. Because in our case, S3, right? So we need to see the how to use this for S3. Okay, you see here. So sorry, guys. Yeah, this is the one, right? You see the example. So take that, come here. Let me replace this. And this is where you need to tell, hey, get the value from which bucket, which state file. So in my case, the VPC is stored in this bucket and in this key, correct? So get these details, come to your EC2 project. In the EC2 project, just replace that. So get the values from this bucket, get the values from this particular location. So that is where the VPC stateful is already stored, and US East 1 is my region, and you don't need to specify this information. I'm good. So now whatever the values that are stored in the state file, all the values you will be getting the access through this data source. Now you tell, hey, get the value from this data source, correct? In your ec2.tf, wherever you want to specify the subnet ID, tell that get the value from data source, specify the data source type, then specify the data source name, right? Then specify the value that was actually exported. I think in my case, subnet, right? Subnet underscore, let me see the value. This is the value, right? The one which was exported in your VPC project. Let me take that exported output variable and let me specify here. That's how we need to reference the value, guys. Now it is a dynamic. When you run the code, the Terraform will go to this bucket and will get the value, right? And use that value here. That's how it is dynamic. It's a simple concept. We're spending some time because of the logical dependencies. I'll be closing the session in next 5 minutes, guys, probably. Okay. So before that, one question for you. Let me take this scenario. When you are actually writing the Terraform code for your project, if your resources were created as part of the same project, you already familiar how to do the referencing by telling the resource block type dot name dot attribute, right? If the resource is already there in AWS, which you want to use, now I'm using the concept called data block, correct? Now the question for you is, sometimes the existing resource might have been managed by a different Terraform project, the way how the VPC is done today. Sometimes the existing resource may not be a Terraform managed project. As an example, take a AMI ID. Let's say in my EC2 now I wanted to, I wanted to give the AMI ID here. Do you think this AMI ID you can get it from a existing Terraform state file somewhere? Are you managing this AMI ID as part of the existing Terraform projects? No, right? Getting me, guys? The subnet is actually done by our another Terraform project. We know that the subnet ID is there in any state file. I get it from here. But the AMI ID is not part of any state file because AMI is not created by the Terraform, right? If I want to use this existing AMI, let's say if I go to the EC2 and there will be some AMI list here, I want to use that AMI ID. You can't go with the same data section that I have shown you some time back, right? I mean to say, if I come to the AMI block here, you see here, there is a golden AMI. Let's say this is the AMI that I wanted to use. You can't take this AMI ID as a hard coded and put it here. Again, that's a bad coding style. Why? What is the case tomorrow your AMI ID get changes, correct? Tomorrow someone will remove this AMI and they will register a new AMI. They will tell that, hey, can you use this new AMI ID? If you use these values hard coded like this, your code will go in a stale. So that's not a good idea. So how to reference these existing AWS resources a dynamic way? I can't use the same concept, correct? Sometime back I got this subnet IDs using this Terraform underscore remote state, right? I can't use this because in this time the AMI ID is not part of any of my you know uh, Terraform state. So we need to use the data block, but the data block type will be different, guys, right? So here, if you wanted to get the AMI ID which is already exist, you go for AWS underscore AMI as a type. This is not a resource block. This is a data block. What's the difference between a resource block and data block, guys? Let's say here, if I go with a resource block as an example, what will happen? If you use the resource block, that means you are trying to create a resource here. If you use the data block, that means this resource is already there in AWS. I'm trying to get that into my current Terraform code to use those specific values. That's the difference between resource block and the data block. And this is the type of the data block because I wanted to use the AMI this time. And maybe let's say this is my web AMI. Any name would be fine. Now, how do you specify the details within the data block, guys? Get into the documentation. AWS, okay. So you need to search for the data source blocks, and you see here, this is the data source documentation for AWS underscore AMI, and you see some examples here and some argument references. Just follow all these things. For now, to make this faster, I'll just copy the example syntax. I'll just put it here. This is my web AMI. I'm just doing some cleanup, guys. all what you need to tell that, hey, can you get the AMI ID, which is most recently created timestamp? Okay, and let me delete all this. Let me delete all these filters. Not needed this entire stuff. I'm making it more simple, right? So can you get the AMI which is most recently created? Can you get the AMI that the AMI owner is so and so? In my case, let's say the AMI owner is who? You see this owner, guys? This is the owner. Owner is your AWS account ID. That is not going to be changed, right? Any AMI that you create will have the same owner, right? Let's say the owner should be like this. The name of the golden AMI should be web server. That's my goal. So whichever the AMI that has the name as a web server, after the web server, it can be anything. You see, I'm giving star here. That means the name should be start with a web server. After that, it can be anything. It can be web server hyphen star, sorry, web server hyphen any date, web server hyphen one, web server hyphen two. It can be any name. As long as the name is started with web server, take that, get the most recent timestamp. The owner should be like this. If you closely look at this, guys, I'm just making a telling to Terraform that how it has to filter your existing resource and get that resource it into this. That way tomorrow, if anyone is doing any changes to the AMI, they will ensure that the AMI name should start with web server always. Web server hyphen one, web server hyphen two, web server hyphen whatever. That is how they will be giving the name start with web server only. The ID can be anything. I don't care now. Why? Whenever you use this data source, the Terraform will go to AWS and will filter the resources based on this information, and it get the one which is most relevant one. Are we good with this? Why it is most relevant one? You said that most recent is true. If there are multiple AMIs with the same web server naming convention, it will just look for the create time, and whichever the one created recently, that will be picked up, and that AMI ID is being used in your project. That's how it will be a dynamic, guys. Now let me come back and let me go to EC2 folder. Right now, let me run a Terraform apply command. Maybe init. Why there is one error, guys? Yeah, this is not done. Now you tell that, hey, get the AMI ID from data source, the data source block name dot the name dot specify the ID. Now your code is done. Let me initialize the project. You go and deploy the project. This concept I can apply for instance type. I can apply for key pair also. I can apply for anything. Even in this case, the key pair also existing one, right? The key pair is already there, which I'm using. No, don't take the name hard coded. You can follow the same data concept, apply the filter, get the value dynamically and specify it here. Same works for anything that is already existed in AWS case. Now Terraform apply. So that's the story for today, and we are done. We are just trying to do some more improvements the way how we can write a Terraform code with the introduction of backend and the data blocks. In the data blocks, I talked about two types: the general data source block, and one is the Terraform remote state as the data block. Right? If the resource is managed by a different project, you go with this approach. If the resource is not a AWS project but it's already there, then you go with the data source block and render the values dynamically it into your current project. Right? So I got one error, that is fine. So we don't have much time to do troubleshooting now. We'll get this implemented tomorrow. Now I'm getting into the question hour, guys. Okay. So let me talk about this one, right? So let's say here in the AMI section, right? Rather me using the data block, if I use the value here, closely look at this case. Whether you give the value here directly as a hard coded, or you go with a variable concept called AMI ID and you declare the variable here as AMI ID, then you give the value in the Terraform variable.tf files as AMI ID. What makes difference, guys? Both are same, right? Both are same. This value, either you give it in the code directly here. I just make no, I just converted that it into a variable fashion. Now you are giving the value here, but this is still a hard coded. Tomorrow, if someone else is deregistering this AMI and they are creating a new AMI, do you think your code works? No, because you are referencing the old value. Now you got the latest AMI ID, you are not getting that. So rather using this value as a hard coded, whether you keep it in the code directly or you pass it in the terraform.tf files, either the way, it's a hard coded value, right? So if you are not doing so, if you go with this data data block like this, it should not be within the code. Okay. If you do so, then it is a dynamic. Why it is dynamic? The Terraform will look into the data block. It will look for these filters. There is no ID directly given here, right? It will look for the filters. The list of AMIs, get the AMI which has this ownership, get the AMI which is recently created, get the AMI which is starting with this web server name, and then use that AMI ID. That's how it is dynamic. So tomorrow if the AMI get changes, no worry, it gets the latest one. It just need to have this naming convention to be managed. So whoever is creating the AMI, they ensure that the name is start with web server only. So it just pick up the latest one. Are we good with this? If any questions, do let me know, or else we are good for today, guys. And all these exercises are already there in my Bitbucket as a referencing. You can make use of them as well. And the thing that I'm interested here, right? The approach, right? So tomorrow, if I ask you, hey, can you create a security group? You should know how to do that. I don't need to show you how to create for every AWS resource. You got me what I'm trying to? Once you know this approach, we should be able to do for any resource. Well, team, if any questions, do let me know, or else we are good for today. Hope you are enjoying this Terraform lectures, and it's very easy to write a code. No questions, seems?